Hi, everyone. I'm joined today by Dimitri Lascaris. Dimitri joins us from Greece. Uh, Dimitri is a very well recognized and respected lawyer. He's a journalist and an activist. He's very active on social media, and you can follow his Reason to Resist um, show, although I think he's moving to Substack soon. But I will just call up Dimitri's page just for anybody curious. Oh dear, hold on, Dimitri. Sorry about this. Yeah, there's Dimitri Lascaris, his biographical details, his professional details, and some of his great work that he does. Making documentaries and interviewing various people like Ray McGovern, their ex-CIA analyst. He also had Roger Waters from the Pink Floyd, well, ex-Pink Floyd, talking about Gaza. Um, so, uh, Dimitri, thank you for joining me.
Hi, Finian. Pleasure to talk to you today.
We're going to talk about two things tonight, Dimitri. That's what's happening in Gaza with the ceasefire and potentially a ceasefire or peace deal in Ukraine with the Trump administration. Now, Dimitri Lascaris has got quite a high-profile career as a lawyer on Wall Street. He worked with some of the biggest banks and financial institutions on Wall Street and oversaw, negotiated some major deals. You can read all about them at his site there. So Dimitri Lascaris knows a lot about making deals, to put it in a nutshell. Dimitri, the new president, Donald Trump, 47th president of the US, in 1987, he wrote a book, The Art of the Deal. It was a bestseller, and it garnered him a reputation for being a fantastic deal maker. In the 3 weeks of his presidency, his second presidency, he's got the whole world wrong-footed with one initiative or kind of a gambit after another. The European Union, the Canadians, the Latin Americans seem to be all running around like headless chickens. Dimitri, can I just put it to you? It might sound a bit facetious, this question. Donald Trump, a genius dealmaker.
Look, as my partner Farida, who's got more wisdom in these matters than I do, would say, she characterizes Donald Trump as a failed businessman. As you've indicated, Finian, I've had a lot of experience, more than I would like, frankly, in the corporate world, both representing large banks in the earlier part of my career and major corporations, and then making a major switch in the middle of my career to becoming a plaintiff side class actions lawyer, where I represented individuals and groups who had been harmed by corporations, which personally I found a much more satisfying experience. But along the way, I had a lot of interaction with business persons who were quite successful, and they didn't behave like Donald Trump. Whatever their, views about privilege and equality may have been, and I certainly didn't share their views. They put a lot of stake in being consistent with their word. They spoke to their counterparts in the business community, at least when they were dealing with them on a face-to-face basis, in a manner that was overtly respectful. They tried to exercise some degree of diplomacy. Again, I don't think fundamentally these were people whose moral code is one that I would subscribe to, but there's a certain way of doing business which is likely to yield transactions, agreements that people regard as being beneficial to themselves. And there's a certain way of doing business which is likely to result in acrimony, distrust, and ultimately bankruptcy. And Donald Trump ascribes to the latter way of doing business. He doesn't speak to his counterparts in a way that is respectful. His word is mud. It's absolutely worthless. And to give you a prime example, the Gaza ceasefire deal, Finian, is one that is to be guaranteed by its terms by three governments, the governments of Qatar, Egypt, and the United States obviously being the most powerful of them all. Donald Trump has unilaterally rewritten that deal. And I'll just give you one way in which he's done that. He suddenly announced yesterday I think it was yesterday, perhaps the day before, that Hamas is required to release all of the detainees it has in its custody by this Saturday. Okay. Under the terms of the ceasefire agreement, which, and this is not simply my opinion, this is universally acknowledged, the Hamas and the other Palestinian militants were not obliged to release the hostages until the end of the second phase of the ceasefire deal. We're not even near the end of the first phase. The first phase, which is 42 days, is set to expire in early March. And in an article written by the New York Times, no less, obviously pro-Israel, it was acknowledged anonymously by 3 Israeli officials and 2 mediators that Israel is not complying with the ceasefire deal.
Hmm.
And that's already been documented by human rights organizations like Euromed Monitor. And so what you have is Donald Trump just deciding, and frankly, I watched the press conference in which he issued this declaration that these detainees must all be liberated by this Saturday. It was as though he was simply pulling that date out of
Hmm.
his derriere. It wasn't something he had even given any thought to. So this type of behavior where you break your, and you know, I can talk to you about the nuclear deal with Iran, which he destroyed, pulling the United States out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. One time after another, both he and his predecessors in the American government, the Biden administration, Obama, have violated their agreements. And this is not something that is conducive to successful business career, and it certainly is not conducive to international détente and the resolution of international conflicts.
Well, critics would point out, Dimitri, on his business, so-called business achievements and his so-called wealth, that it's just a trail of bankruptcies and bailouts. So, I mean, that alone would indicate that his business acumen is not as all that it's cracked up to be by primarily by himself. Um, Now, well said, Dimitri, about the good point about the Gaza deal. Thanks for teasing all that out. Trump is saying that if the all the hostages aren't released by Hamas on Saturday by Saturday noon, it's high noon time. He said that all hell should break loose. He's given Israel a green light to just go berserk and do its worst. So you know, one would wonder, like, there again, his whole business attitude is very much, just ripping things up and, causing chaos, reneging and making the rules up as he goes along.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you broke up there for a moment. Um, and I don't think that this is ultimately going to be conducive to any to success in any foreign policy agenda, whatever his may be.
Mhm.
Um, there has to be a certain level of confidence on the side of your counterparties in any type of negotiation or arrangement that you can be relied upon to keep your end of the bargain. Otherwise, they will simply regard you as agreement incapable. So this is going to have implications not only for resolving the terrible, devastating conflicts in West Asia, but also the Ukraine war. Why
Yeah.
would the Americans have any confidence in any deal negotiated by Donald Trump? Or again, I want to be clear about this. Violating agreements is a bipartisan affair in the United States. This is not something that's unique to the Republicans. The Democrats also consistently violated their undertakings to their international partners. Just to give you one that's of particular pertinence to Ukraine, both Democratic and Republican leaders of the United States government assured the Soviet Union that they would not expand NATO eastward, and also gave such assurances to Boris Yeltsin after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. They repeatedly violated that undertaking with devastating consequences in Ukraine.
Hmm.
So we're talking here really about it's not. I want to be fair to the Donald. It's not a feature that is peculiar to him, but the
Yeah.
United States government has undermined its credibility around the world over a period of decades of violating its undertakings.
Hmm. Dimitri, can I just ask you, go back to Gaza, his proposal to relocate the Palestinian people, some 2 million people from the Gaza Strip. He's called it. He wants to make it into the Riviera of the Middle East, promising that they'll have a beautiful, idyllic future, resettlement, location. As he says, a beautiful housing. I mean, is this Trump the art of the deal or the art of the con man again?
Well, Finian, it's almost become I have to use the word nauseating to watch all of these geopolitical commentators, some of whom, frankly, I respect, try to divine what they regard as Trump's true intentions. There's a lot of speculation, for example, about they said when he met with Netanyahu and he'd made this declaration they were going to turn Gaza into the Riviera, that he was setting a trap for Netanyahu. This is a theory I've heard a great deal. That he was, because he declared that the United States was going to take over Gaza. And so, according to some of these commentators, what this meant was that Israel would have to effectively ask Trump's permission to bomb Gaza because now Gaza belonged to the United States. I think this is really a mug's game, trying to divine what Donald Trump's real intentions are. We don't actually know at the end of the day. The rational way for people to behave is to believe that Donald Trump has the agenda he says he has, unless and until he or other sources produce credible evidence to undermine that assumption. There is no credible evidence that Donald Trump is lying or misrepresenting his intentions about Gaza. He's consistently given the Israelis what they want. He gave the Israelis the transfer of the Israeli embassy or the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in his first administration, in contrary to the overwhelming will of the international community. He gave the Israelis the U.S. government's recognition of the Israeli annexation of the Syrian Golan Heights, which was illegal. He gave the Israelis the assassination of Iran's top general, Qasem Soleimani. He has consistently given the Israelis what they want. He has said repeatedly that he's going to clear the Palestinians out of Gaza. There's absolutely no question that that is what the Israeli political elite wants. And in fact, by all indications, a substantial majority of the Israeli Jewish population wants. What reason is there to doubt that he's serious? And now we've seen the spectacle of him actually having these meetings with the autocrat of Jordan. They're really quite humiliating meetings, I would think, from the perspective of the Jordanians, where he's openly pressuring the Jordanian puppet to do precisely what he said repeatedly he intends to do. So I think the rational approach, when we try to assess what the Trump administration's actual agenda is to assume that its stated agenda is the real agenda, unless and until we have credible, objective evidence to the contrary. I'm not suggesting that Donald Trump is trustworthy. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that trying to, divine what's in the orange head of his and, psychoanalyze the man is really a counterproductive exercise. We should go on the basis of objective evidence. And I see no reason to doubt, Finian, that he's going to do everything within his power to expel the Palestinian people from Gaza, precisely as the Israeli government wants him to do.
Yeah. Well said, Dimitri. I would agree wholeheartedly with you. I think it's invidious to overthink Trump. I mean, I think it can be just taken at face value that he's being a very stupid and brutish imperialist that has the arrogance to just treat people as if they're like cattle to move off onto some other reservation. So thanks, Dimitri, for that really frank and direct analysis. I think you're dead right there. I mean, so under international law, Dimitri, what Trump is proposing to do in this relocation of people from Gaza is really ethnic cleansing. It violates the Geneva Conventions, I think the Genocide Conventions on forced displacement of people. I mean, he's really just articulating and exulting in a huge crime. Isn't that correct, Dimitri?
100%. It's also a violation of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. It's a violation of customary international law. It's a violation of, the United Nations Charter. The United States is a signatory to the UN Charter. It's a signatory to the Genocide Convention. It's a signatory to not to the Rome Statute, but it is a signatory to the Fourth Geneva Convention. Again, these are all commitments that the United States government has made, and the Donald
Mm,
Trump administration has not withdrawn the United States from any of these treaties. And certain obligations under international law, which we characterize, or which international lawyers characterize as erga omnes obligations, these are not something that you can opt out of. And
mm,
ethnic cleansing and genocide are two such obligations. So, what Donald Trump has effectively done is has declared his intention to commit a crime against humanity. It's
mm,
as simple as that. He's handed to the International Criminal Court prosecutor Karim Khan, this British barrister, evidence on a golden platter of his criminal intentions. And he is now in the process of implementing
mm,
those intentions by openly pressuring
mm,
Arab governments to sign on to this plan. And also, he released a large amount of 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs, which the Biden administration had paused because Israel was using them to attack refugees in Gaza, to obliterate refugees in Gaza. He's released those to the Israelis. So he's not only declared an intention to commit a crime against humanity, but he's actually now taken concrete steps in order to fulfill that goal. So I would say that the International Criminal Court prosecutor, Finian, has ample grounds to indict Donald Trump for
yeah.
war crimes and crimes against humanity. And ultimately, if the International Criminal Court wants to maintain any degree of legitimacy and credibility, it is going to have to indict American war criminals. It can't
Mm,
continue to give them a free pass, as it has done repeatedly in Afghanistan and Iraq and on and on.
mm.
Here, a case has been presented to Karim Khan on a golden platter. Why has that man not acted? Well, I would suggest that it's because he fears for his own hide.
Yeah.
It comes down, it's as simple as that.
Mm. It is deplorable, Dimitri, shocking that the international community, so-called international community, the European Union, United Nations, various other international institutions have not just condemned Trump in the strongest possible terms for what he's proposing over Gaza. It's quite alarming that there's this acceptance of his intention as somehow being respectable or funny, even, or a bit crazy. But there is nobody actually speaking out, condemning him in the way that you have done, which is all credit to you.
Mhm. Well, I sadly have to concur with your assessment that certainly the international institutions, the principal international institutions, have been completely ineffectual. There was just a post that was put out by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, in which he was, as Ali Abouminam of Electronic Intifada pointed out on X, he was effectively placing the blame for the current um, downward trajectory of this ceasefire on Hamas. Apparently, Antonio Guterres doesn't read the New York Times because,
Mhm.
as I mentioned earlier, you have Israeli officials acknowledging to the New York Times, a pro-Israel Zionist media organization, that Israel is violating the ceasefire.
Yeah.
And yet you have the Secretary General trying to place the blame on Hamas.
Mm.
Euromed Monitor has documented that since the ceasefire went into effect, the Israelis have killed over 100 Palestinians. They have not only violated their obligation to increase significantly the humanitarian supplies in entering Gaza, and to provide a large number of tents to homeless Palestinians who are sheltering in the winter conditions, but they're killing people
Mm.
and making incursions into territory that they're supposed to have vacated. So they violated the ceasefire, opinion 6 ways from Sunday.
Mm.
And you have people like Antonio Guterres trying to make it sound like it's the fault of the Palestinian resistance that this ceasefire agreement is on the verge of collapse. So
Yeah.
yes, the international legal architecture, not just the ICC, not just the UN, even the ICJ,
Mm.
have been largely or completely discredited by this horror show.
It should be noted, Dimitri, that Russia and China, among others, I can't think of any other country, no doubt Iran, but Russia and China have condemned Trump's ethnic cleansing plan for Gaza. At least that's some, uh, a modicum of some kind of rationality and moral, standard that Russia and China have called them out for what it is. Um, Dimitri, can I just then ask you, um, Trump's, this is how his credibility is being scrutinized now over this horrible proposal to increase ethnic cleansing in Gaza. And yet, this guy, this 47th president, is proposing to solve the Ukraine crisis. Now, it doesn't bode very well that Trump can do the art of the deal in Ukraine if this is his abject lack of any kind of like principle as we see in Gaza. I mean, I suppose to be fair to him, he has talked about the Russian grievance of NATO's expansion since the end of the Cold War, the so-called end of the Cold War in 91. And he has mentioned that Russia was transgressed by that relentless expansion of NATO. So we could give him that as some level of understanding, but um, just on the point of like his his performance and his statements over Gaza, Dimitri, you alluded to it earlier on. How do you see that being played in Ukraine?
Well, he's unfortunately surrounded himself with people who seem to be of a similar perspective to the Biden administration. This character Kellogg, this retired general, and he himself, Trump, has threatened the Russians with further sanctions if they don't comply with his demands. This is not again. This has been tried repeatedly by the European Union with disastrous effect for the economy of Europe and particularly Germany, I should add. Trying to force the Russians to accept um, some kind of a resolution of this conflict by means of economic coercion. So he's continued to use that kind of language, as have the people he's appointed to deal with this task. As far as I know, Finian, he continues to allow the flow of weapons from the United States to Ukraine, although perhaps in diminished quantities. The problem I think that Trump has, it's not just a problem of credibility with the Russian Federation. The US government has completely destroyed its own credibility with the entire non-Western world, I think, when it comes to doing deals and trying to resolve conflicts or potential conflicts by means of agreements. The
Mm.
problem is that Donald Trump has no leverage. He has absolutely no leverage. The sanctions have failed. The United States has provided pretty much everything it could possibly provide to Ukraine by way of military equipment, short of nuclear weapons, which would obviously be the ultimate insanity to introduce nuclear weapons into the conflict. So, what leverage does he have over the Russian Federation at the end of the day? The economic sanctions aren't going to work. They haven't worked. Providing hundreds of billions of dollars worth of weapons to Ukraine hasn't worked. Providing training to NATO standards of tens of thousands of Ukrainian military personnel has failed. Providing real-time battlefield intelligence to Ukraine, as the NATO military forces have done throughout the conflict, and also allowing and perhaps even encouraging thousands upon thousands of soldiers from Western countries who were trained by Western militaries to fight alongside the Ukrainians. That hasn't worked either. So
Mhm.
what is his leverage? He has no leverage, and yet he's telling the Russians that they have to make substantial compromises. The Russians have said very clearly, and I would say, although I would strongly have preferred that they not have invaded Ukraine, I understand why they did it. And they've said very clearly now that after 3 years of warfare, in which they have undoubtedly suffered significant casualties and have been on the receiving end of major rounds of sanctions, that there are minimum requirements for them to do a deal. Their
Mhm.
minimum requirements are they have to have full control over the four oblasts that they annexed under Russian law that they annexed, namely Kherson, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, and Luhansk, and also Crimea.
Mhm.
Ukraine must stay out of NATO forever, and there have to be measures taken to protect the rights of Russian speakers and ethnic Russians in what remains of Ukraine,
Yeah.
which I think would include, guarantees under the Ukrainian constitution to respect the language rights of Russian speakers, and
Mhm.
also to protect the Russian Orthodox Church. These are the minimum requirements for Russia, and they've been absolutely clear, and they've said it over and over again. And whatever you may think, Finian, about whether, this is fair or just, the military reality is, and the economic reality is, that there is no way to prevent the Russians from ultimately achieving these goals by means of
Mhm.
warfare. The Ukrainian
You've-
military is collapsing. So Donald Trump is stuck between a rock and a hard place because if he agrees to those things, it will be clear that NATO has been defeated, and he will be accused of having capitulated to Russia, something that he was relentlessly accused of being a puppet of Putin during his first administration, although he adopted many policies that were belligerent towards Russia.
Mhm.
And he's prides himself on being a winner, on being a champion, on being strong and powerful. So any agreement on his part, which uh, coincides with or respects the basic demands of the Russian Federation, will be a humiliation for the United States government and all of NATO.
Mhm. Could be, could
But
be,
he has no leverage, so he's stuck between a rock and a hard place.
and it could be dangerous, Dimitri, given Trump's megalomania, his narcissism, for him to be the figurehead of a humiliating defeat could be sort of unbearable for Trump, leading to very irrational threats or aggression towards Russia. Um,
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I think he sees everything in terms of dominance and victory. Competition. He doesn't
mhm.
see the world in terms of cooperation, you know,
We've momentarily lost Dimitri. I hope the get the signal back here. Um, this was just getting to a very interesting point in the conversation about
although
um, Trump's prospects of cutting a deal in Ukraine. Dimitri, as you could hear there, was not very optimistic. Dimitri, are you back? Hello, Dimitri.
I think so. Vinny, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can, Dimitri.
Hi, Vinny.
Thank goodness you're
Can you hear
back because you were on a
me?
roll there and it was getting very interesting. We've only got a few minutes left, Dimitri, but please, please, try to finish that thought. That was interesting. The potential danger
Yeah.
of the next few months.
Yeah, I was simply saying that Donald Trump is, fanatically obsessed with being perceived as a winner. And, when he talks about making America great again, what he's talking about is dominance. He's not talking about win-win relationships, mutually beneficial arrangements. It's all about American dominance. So I don't think it's not just a political problem for him to capitulate to the basic demands of Russia. It's also, as you've indicated, a psychological problem. This is not something this man is
Mm,
emotionally and psychologically do to recognize the realities of the situation. So I don't think ultimately, Finian, he's going to be able to resolve this by
yeah,
means of negotiation. I think that this is going to be decided on the battlefield,
yeah.
sadly
Uh,
to say, for the Ukrainian people.
yeah. Dimitri, I'm going to just in the last few minutes remaining, just explore a concept you came up with. The, the Trump slogan is MAGA, MAGA, Make America Great Again. You coined a new one on that, MAWA, MAWA, with Regis Tremblay, the great film documentarian Regis Tremblay, in an interview last week that I caught. It was a nice play on the concept of MAGA. You've turned it into MAWA, Make America Weak Again, and certainly, uh, Regis, within days of you coming up with that funny but very strong critique of MAGA. We've had the Gaza debacle. Arab leaders at the White House, like the Jordanian puppet, as you called him quite rightly, and looking very uncomfortable and squeamish. I mean, Trump seems to be really upending um, American allies and American clients in the Middle East and further afield. One would kind of surmise that his this "Make America Weak Again" is playing out dramatically under this whirlwind of Trump's so-called deal making.
Yes, I think, I coined that phrase because I believe he's accelerating the decline of the American empire. He's doing this by, first of all, failing to address the core problems of about American weakness, the fact that you don't have a national healthcare system, the fact that there is grotesque inequality and it's getting worse, the fact that so much money is being spent on the military as opposed to civilian infrastructure within the country. The fact that you have an epidemic of gun crimes. There's more guns in circulation in the United States than there are people. I could go on and on, Finian. He's not addressing, he keeps talking about fentanyl, you know, but it's been demonstrated over a period of decades that the war on drugs has been a miserable failure. He's doubling down on that rather than addressing the root causes of substance abuse in the United States, which is a serious problem. So Donald Trump is ignoring the real problems confronting America and making the problems of the international decline of American power even worse. So at the end of the day, what Donald Trump is going to do, and perhaps this is a good thing for the rest of us if we can avoid, a calamitous war, he's going to actually hasten the demise of the American empire. In that respect, he may turn out to be a godsend. But again, the great danger to us all is that he's going to kill a lot of people along the way.
Mm. Dimitri, well said. I like that one. Accelerating the demise of the American empire. I think that will make the headline for this conversation. Um, Dimitri Lascaris, thank you so much for your company and your great thoughts, your generous insights. Thanks very much, Dimitris. Dimitri,
My pleasure, Finian. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
thank you, Dimitri. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.